Or you would test.
All right, our fourth and final contestant, Maithili. Please help me welcome Maithili.
Good afternoon, Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and guests. James Thurber, the very well-known American author, talks of one character in his book. It's his grandmom. His grandmom, sometime in the early 1900s, she believed that electricity was dripping invisibly all over the house from the sockets. So guess what she did? She went around screwing in bulbs into every socket to prevent this. Yes, technology can be very hard to adapt to, appreciate, and embrace. So today I'm going to talk about why it may be a little harder for older folks to actually appreciate this. Let me start off with one story. I'm sure the story will ring a bell in some way for most of you. I have this uncle back home. He is a retired engineer, very smart person. He consults with a lot of construction firms. He's active. And he got a mobile phone recently. So what he does is very interesting. His address book on the phone is empty. Guess what he does? Every time he receives a call, instead of saving the number on the phone, he goes around looking for his black diary. He writes down the number very diligently into the book. When he has to make a call back, he picks up the book to make the call. That's quite funny. He doesn't know how to save the number into the phone, and his ego, it won't let him ask anyone for help. Remember that this is the same engineer who can sit down and design a bridge or maybe a road, but he can't enter a number into the phone. Probably a 5-year-old kid will laugh when it hears this. Sometimes, and this sort of fear is all-pervading, sometimes even when there is no fear involved, we see that people take a lot of, it requires a lot of effort to actually appreciate new technology. This is not restricted to people who don't work on technology. Let me give you a very striking example that will illustrate this point. In 1999, when Jack Welch was the CEO of GE, what he did was a number of reforms. He brought in a lot of them. One of them was to aggressively enter into e-commerce. Of course, this would be a lot easier if the company went online, which it wasn't at that point. So to get things rolling, he wanted the senior executives in the company to actually start using email. They weren't doing that. So he sent out a memo that stated all top executives were henceforth going to use only email to communicate with each other. These people didn't know how to do it. Guess what they did? The great executives that had secretaries would get them to print out the emails, they would read it, respond, and the secretary would actually send back a response. You wouldn't expect that from executives who dabble in technology every day, would you? That sounds like a very interesting story to me. So you can see that it is very hard for an older generation to adapt to this, especially because of the number of years they have put in and they've used something. It's very hard to replace it with something brand new overnight. So it takes a lot of effort. If you're in the field of technology, I guess it's forced upon you. Otherwise, you may just reject the technology. It makes it a lot easier to do that. Another important point, I think, is that a lot of technology these days is designed and conceived by youngsters. So the target audience is possibly a younger generation. Let's take an example of mobile phones. Mobile phones started off with just making phone calls. Everybody used it. And now there is texting. I'm sure all of us use texting at some point. And you see hordes and hordes of youngsters, kids in schools and colleges texting all the time. You don't see that happen very often in, say, people from my mom's generation. How many of them actually sit down and text on phones? I would send a text to my mom, and she would never respond. The first time, I had to go back home, show her the phone, and I read out the message to her, just like what the executives at GE did. This is what happens. Another example we can think of is the tablets, the smart tablets that we have, say the iPad. it seems like a great idea. All of us like the idea. It's very portable, handy. You can check your mail anywhere. But if you see the numbers of the iPad survey, the sales bell curve hardly has a representation of people beyond 50. I think it may be because it is not convenient. The form factor may not be appealing. All these reasons will it makes it very hard to accept something new like this. So, our arrogance might assume here that any new technology that comes in is automatically useful and should be used by all. So, with these examples, I think we can say this sort of a thing happens a lot to older folks, right? Probably in their 50s or 60s, right? Here, of course, I wasn't talking about not so useful technology. There are some other examples which I believe are not very useful. Let's take video games. You see kids playing video games all the time. I think it's a waste of time. When we were kids, we all grew up outside. We would play on the streets, we would climb trees, make new friends. But kids these days, they play video games all the time. There is talk of that. There is no human contact at all. I don't understand why they do that. Okay, I think I get the point. So at this point, it is very safe to say that technology is not easy to adapt to. Whether it was James Thurber's grandmother in 1990s, whether it was GE's executives in 1999, or my uncle in 2009, or me in 2040, perhaps sooner.